This is Little Mac.
Little Mac.
This is also Little Mac. Even this is Little Mac. But this is not Little Mac. Or according to Nintendo, it is?
Huh?
For decades, Punch-Out fans have been baffled by the inexplicable change in the protagonist's design from 1987's Punch-Out for NES to 1994's Super Punch-Out for the SNES. Was this the same Mac from the NES game? And if so, how did we go from a 4'8" 17-year-old underdog who knocked out opponents twice his size to a generic blonde average height Matt Damon lookalike, best known for saying piece of cake?
Piece of cake.
Could it be a different incarnation of Mac? Classic Nintendo retconning? Or perhaps just a really botched haircut? Whatever the case, this redesign and the character's true identity has sparked quite the debate among the Punch-Out community. So who exactly is this guy? Well, some official promotional materials suggest that this is the same Mac returning in Super Punch-Out, even as recently as the game's description for Nintendo Switch Online. But how? Other than the iconic green gloves, these two look nothing alike. According to the game's Wii Shop channel description, the game takes place after the NES and Wii installments, stating that Little Mac has parted ways with Doc Lewis, gotten a makeover, and added new moves to his arsenal, like the Rapid Punch and the Knockout Punch. I'm sorry, what? That sounds like a shitty fanfiction. You're telling me Little Mac retired, got a tan, dyed his hair blonde, shaved off his eyebrows, returned to boxing without Doc Lewis and the Star Punch, the very move that Doc so graciously taught him?
I invented the Star Punch. Come on, Mac.
Another piece of evidence comes from a rather unlikely source, 2005's Fight Night Round 2 for GameCube. The SNES boxer is an unlockable playable character, and they specifically name him Little Mac. Wait, from Seattle, Washington? The real Mac is from New York.
Yeah, in New York!
But that was likely just a nod to Nintendo of America's headquarters. And I think the reason they went with the SNES design was for cross-promotion. Super Punch-Out was the most recent game in the series at the time, and they probably named him Little Mac for brand recognition. And to be fair, the game was made by EA, so most fans don't consider it to be canon anyway. So even with Nintendo telling us that it is the same Little Mac, why do fans still have their doubts?
I disagree. I disagree, Gary.
Super Punch-Out itself tells us next to nothing about this guy, while the NES title specifically introduces Little Mac and Doc Lewis, complete with stats, dialogue, even a backstory on how the two met revealed in an official comic strip. But with Super Punch-Out, there's nothing in the game or manual that confirms that Mac is back. The manual just refers to the protagonist as your player, and commercials and vintage promo material avoids giving this guy a name, except for this one piece that refers to him as Challenger. Coincidentally, that's the same generic term used for the nameless green-haired boxer in the arcade games. Which brings me to my next point. Super Punch-Out doesn't really feel like a direct sequel to its predecessor. If anything, it feels more like a spiritual successor to the arcade titles. No rounds, no stamina, the return of the KO meter, and a customizable name for your character. Some fans speculate that since you yourself named the boxer, there wasn't a need to bring back Little Mac, and it wouldn't really make sense to rename him. And the only reason Little Mac was, well, little in the NES version was because the console couldn't replicate the arcade's wireframe look. So to compromise, they made him 4'8", just so that you're able to actually see your opponent. The SNES, however, was way more capable, so they just went with a slightly transparent, average-sized boxer sprite. What makes this whole situation even more confusing is that early beta footage actually features a boxer that bears much more of a resemblance to the NES Mac. But by release, that design was replaced, and to this day we still don't know exactly why. Honestly, I really think Super Punch-Out should have brought back Mac and Doc. The two had a great dynamic, and Mac had that underdog energy you couldn't help but root for. It also made for extremely satisfying gameplay, playing as a short kid that literally has to jump to land punches. But with Super Punch-Out's average height protagonist, while that may have always been the intent to begin with, it just doesn't hit the same in my opinion. Coming off the massive success of Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, Super Punch-Out! Had some big shoes to fill. It was 7 years later, and this time there was no big-name boxer endorsement attached. Instead, they featured the 3 returning boxers from the previous game on the cover. Speaking of those returning boxers, the game has some weird inconsistencies with some of their statistics. Why that is, I'm assuming they just f***ed up. But that alone technically debunks both the prequel theory and Nintendo's claim that the game takes place after the NES and Wii installments. After a 15-year hiatus, Punch-Out! Made its return on the Wii in 2009, and this time it brought back the real Little Mac, along with Doc Lewis in his corner once again. There was no debate, this was the same Mac that fans knew and loved, albeit with a few design tweaks. Punch-Out! Wii was heavily inspired by the NES version in particular, returning to that style of gameplay, having every opponent return, and tons of homage. Only 2 fighters from Super Punch-Out! Made the cut, and as for Blondie, he's nowhere to be seen. In an interview, Next Level Games developer Bryce Holiday even confirmed that the SNES boxer was a completely different character, so take that as you will. You can tell that Nintendo and Next Level Games clearly understood what fans wanted out of a new entry, with all the marketing emphasizing, "Hells yeah, Mac is back." For real this time. 5 years later, Mac made his long overdue debut in Super Smash Bros., sporting his Wii design with a reference to the SNES look as an alternate costume. Even his assist trophy in Brawl that predated the Wii design was based on the NES version, same with his appearance in Captain Rainbow. All signs point to this being the real Little Mac, or at least the most iconic version. As for the other guy, some fans have dubbed him Peter Punch, which was Mac's original name early in development. I think these instances are just classic Nintendo retconning, and while he may be considered a version of Little Mac, he's certainly not my Mac.
Pizza cake.